Do I have a motion that the governing board adopt the meeting agenda?
I move that we adopt the meeting agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Alhambra. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you, Mrs. Laura. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Meeting adopted. Going to B, discussion. Now we're on a B1 resolution to discuss the resolution / letter to Maricopa County School Superintendent. So I believe we all received hard copies of both the email and the letter that was drafted and reviewed by both Steve and Jim. And so we'll start with presentation or
There is abundance. This is a question session, so if we have comments or questions. If not, get right to signing the letter.
I would like,
Jim, you'll address for
Oh, then we don't have the voice.
yes. Sorry, yeah, I was both had a couple of you. Yeah.
Thank you for being here today.
So just if you can remind us of the process and once this letter is signed, what happens next? I know we had a June 24th meeting for the county superintendent, the county supervisor's office. So if you can just share with us again what this pathway looks for this letter.
Yeah, or we're just trying to follow the statute, the process set forth in statute. So, fortunately, there is a process. If there's definitely a case of an under levy and other districts that follow this, it's very unusual, and this dollar amount is highly unusual. But here we are. So we're making our best effort at following the process as we understand it to be in statute and as the county understands it. Because the statute says what it says in terms of us presenting it to the school superintendent's office, and then she presents it to the county board of supervisors. But that's pretty much all it says. So, they can have their own internal processes layered on top of the statute. And so that's what we're trying to follow. The deadlines you mentioned are their deadlines. Basically, by the third Monday in August, the county board of supervisors is going to set a tax rate. And the question is this special tax levy going to be part of that? So if we want it to be part of it, here's our effort at presenting to the county board, the county school superintendent, an explanation for why this is necessary, some of the background. Of course, there can be lots more detail. We're trying not to overwhelm the county board, the county school superintendent, because we understand that she is not the county assessor, nor is she the county treasurer. So we're trying to take a softer approach with the detail, and again, not to overwhelm her. That's why the letter is only a page and a half and not 10 pages, so that she can then exercise her discretion in presenting it to the county board, the county supervisors. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. We can always kind of question how we got here, and perhaps that's a fair question, and perhaps we can spend time on that going forward. But to me, that question of how we got here is not as important as making the district whole with the special tax levy. If the district, we could spend months trying to unravel what happened with the county, but in the end, they're the experts. They're the ones who were on the front line of levying the tax, assessing the property values. That's on them. We can only ask them questions. We weren't in their seats. We don't know exactly what their process was. But what we're reporting to you is what they've told us. So we haven't gone around them. We really have no way of doing so. So we're trying to be constructive about it and get the process started, as we understand.
On that note, sorry, I think it's convenient. There's some information I would like at some point. Now that we have the parcels listed on the assessor's website, that only represents a portion of the parcels that are owned by the university. So I guess it would be helpful in the future to know of those parcels, which ones have already been moved over to the nonprofit. a little bit more, which was those. And if there is portion of those that are not, what does that mean for the next time? The next tax year, or what does it mean for a future fund? For all of those purposes, particularly forward to. Do you see them? Now that we have this information, that's open.
And then I have a question. Which additional right to that? So here is, they are continuing by property, having the property, the process for that, then it's going, so I'm gonna buy this property, and then it's my fund. So what is the process and how do we go?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure that you can ever know what their internal plans are, but we can certainly figure out what the district's exposure is, if you will. How much property remains to potentially be converted to exempt property and not subject to taxation. So, yeah, that I think we could work with the county to figure that out. But again, I don't think that, I hope that doesn't slow this letter down, because that is separate, just like how we got here is a separate issue. What the potential damages, if you will, could be in the future is a separate issue. So the focus is on the letter and getting that process started. There won't be any forgiveness on the county side if we don't meet their deadlines. I mean, they have expressed those deadlines pretty clearly. We need to give them time. I prefer not to present them this letter to them on, I think their deadline is June 6th, I think. June 5th. Okay. So, but I'd like to me, it makes more sense to get it in sooner rather than later and not take every day. Because I don't know anything that we're going to learn over the next week or two, especially given the holiday, that is going to change this letter dramatically or change the request. For me, the big question to the board is, do you want to levy the taxes? Do you need that money that you didn't collect? You know, unfairly as it was, but do you need that? And if you need it, you probably do, then this is how we do it. But I understand that's a good point. What's the potential exposure down the road, whether it comes 1, 2, 3, or 5 years? And we put something in the letter about wanting to work with the county to better understand their process. And so hopefully that can start a dialogue with them. Because we really don't know, I still don't know sitting here today, if they were really at fault for that. I don't know if there was negligence. I don't know how to assess that, or if it was just this kind of a one-off, and they dealt with it appropriate from a statutory basis and from their internal procedure basis, perhaps. And maybe there's no negligence, but that probably isn't very satisfying for you to know that you still got this exposure. So I think we all need to get a better understanding of that. That's going to take the county talking to us, and I don't know if emails were shared with you. There was a very good faith effort made by district administration to work with the county going back to February, and the county is sitting on the request for weeks, months at a time. So that's why we're talking in May and not in March. They just weren't responsive. I mean, they have lots of stuff to do, so I'm not going to blame them, but they're the ones. Yeah, exactly. But they're the ones who hold the information, so we're kind of at their mercy. So, to some extent, this letter is also going to be. I mean, we're not just. I don't think we're just presenting it and saying, "Here it is," and do what you will. There needs to be, hopefully, a little bit of a political process as well that accompanies this letter at both levels, both with the county school superintendent and with the board of supervisors. I understand you've probably got a sympathetic ear on the board of supervisors. Maybe only one, but I think once it gets to the board, they'll be. It's more of a procedural matter for them. To me, the real hump is getting past the school superintendent. You said more than you were asking me, but that's
that's still helpful. I do have a question around the ARS 15-905.01. I know it was a question around the truth and taxation notice. Does that apply here? Does it apply to the county effective office? It was something that was noted in the response section.
You want to take that? You mind? I mean, I don't have expertise in that area. Do you?
You know, yes, I'll take that. Sorry. I'm Randy Stein. I'm with Steeple. Jack Weaver is my colleague. And some familiarity with the truth in taxation statute, because as you're aware, there are several instances when school districts, in fact, have to post a truth in taxation notice each year and hold a hearing. This is not one of those items. Most commonly, you've probably seen it for the adjacent ways levy is probably the most common that you've seen it in this district. There are a few other pieces, but this is not one of them.
Can you help me understand why it wouldn't be, just so I have a just more clear understanding of why it wouldn't be?
How the truth in taxation notice works?
Yeah, maybe that might be.
Do you have the statute, Jim? Can you call that from there? Okay. There's items that are specifically called out. They identify base spending for the district. And it's actually a little bit of a contorted definition, but anything above that base of the items that they call out requires the truth in taxation. So it doesn't relate to the qualifying tax rate that's set by the state every year and is, one of the big pieces of funding for the school district, primary property for the school district maintenance and operation. It does not apply to the debt service levy for bonds that are outstanding. It does not apply to the override levies. There's about 3 items that always require truth in taxation. And desegregation is part of the base. Dropout prevention, which I think is only a high school, applies only to high schools. Career and technical education, probably primarily in high schools. Small school adjustment, which you have never seen, you would never be qualifying for that. And then it also calls out the adjacent ways.
Yeah, we don't have these sections. So truly then the only one
Right.
is adjacent.
Right. And I'm trying to, scan quickly, make sure I haven't missed anything. Or, excuse me, the one other item, which is probably what you're getting to, is the liabilities and excess. Liabilities and excess, which is reference to a different statute, I believe has 2 prongs to it. One is some sort of excess legal expense. The other one is related to the school facilities board, actually, that you have requested a repair for some sort of emergency. And they have actually denied you and said, we don't have money to fund that emergency. That actually would give you access to the liabilities and excess measure. But this is none of those.
You said it does not relate to the qualifying tax.
It does not relate to the qualifying tax rate. That is it's about $1.50 right now for an elementary school district that is set statewide every year. That is the first funding source for school district M&O funding. Not the only funding source, but that is the first one. Thank you.
You're coming in this similar situation.
I'm sorry.
We have a ballpark figure of how many districts in the state that have gotten in similar situations and no surprise. Which was different.
But you're talking about flooding,
Yeah,
and that was pretty much every district in the county for Quagmire, but your district was barely impacted. At one point, we had a spreadsheet where we saw, you recall, it was tiny.
Tiny.
Yeah, so that's not an issue here.
but I think Quagmire actually is a bit distinct because Quagmire required refunds to those taxpayers. And so the levies that school districts had associated with those were associated with those refunds. Yes, the property tax roll was adjusted, and that would be similar here. But really the big piece on property line was actually getting refunds to those taxpayers. This is not a refund situation. This is a cash deficit situation.
So I know there were concerns about just, us not knowing sooner that it would lead us to this point of asking the county for a levy. And I know that, and part of my thinking is because I understand that as a district, we tend to operate at a cash deficit. And so can you elaborate a little bit more on that
Sure.
as it relates to Alhambra?
Yeah. I think process-wise, I think the only way you could have avoided being in a situation of requesting the levy from the county literally is if you would have known before February of 24, before that February abstract was printed. And I say you, but I really mean the county, so that the abstract could have been printed properly, prepared properly, printed, sorry, I'm old. Because the statute tells the system, the whole government process, to set the tax rates based on the February abstract. So the February abstract would have had to be right. And it wasn't.
In 2024. Right?
And the February the February abstract in 2024 is for the fiscal 25 year. Yes. Even knowing, that the August abstract was different was not going to help. Because again, they point the process to setting the tax rates on the February abstract numbers. And, the tax roll, the property tax roll is live. It is changing as we sit here. Minor things most of the time, but it's going up and down all the time. And then, they take a snapshot sometime in August. They use those tax rates that were calculated in February, and they send out property tax bills. We get them in September.
I have a concern about it. I have a concern about this, how we do this account. Do we need to start with the legislature? Do we need to start some sort of growing up one small district, we need to get together, association, start lobbying. Something has to change here because this is going to happen. It could happen to us again because we have probably in the districts that the largest nonprofit organization about this.
And to your point, the value of the nonprofit as a percent of your taxable property value is obviously quite large. Quite honestly, this same thing happened you sit in Phoenix Union, but Phoenix Union is massive. This doesn't impact that. The exact same thing, but it's not an impact because as a percentage, it's so small. So to your question, I guess a couple things. What you started talking about at the very beginning of the meeting is trying to get an understanding of, well, what else does GCU own right now that isn't getting the exemption, to understand that. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that tomorrow they won't buy something else and it, could ultimately get that exempt. But I think that would be a good piece of information because you might find that everything they own right now is qualified for the exemption. I think the email from the county said it's not an annual requirement. It would stay exempt. So if that was the case and the world stayed static, it wouldn't. I also have gotten the impression from the county that their, whatever new system means, implementation is more mature, farther along, and they have better checks. I think, as Jim suggested, conversation with the county as to what do those checks mean? What reports are you running in, January of each year, so that if there was this big deviation, that there would be some sort of red flag, a live person could get eyes on it, so that the rule could be set properly in February. There's nothing you can do about any entity qualified for an exemption getting it and reducing your property value. There is nothing you can do about that. The important thing, though, is to know it so that the property tax rate is set correctly.
Which I guess brings me to a question I asked before. We live in a community that is supposed to go in them. They're buying us. It doesn't stop. So when you buy a strip center, does that automatically become my profit? Or is it? I'm having a hard time understanding now, when you buy a strip center and they still have tenants in their businesses, that becomes a nonprofit. Is it property?
Yeah, well, a good question. I think in general, the answer is yes. I think the county, I don't think the county does a whole lot of due diligence. I don't think that's really their. Well, no, but, I mean, we're a big county, right? The fifth biggest county in the country, I think. So I don't know. And then the new system doesn't help matters either. But I think the county basically looks to see who the owner is. I think that's really what the statute requires them to do. If they were getting large amounts of private payments, private revenue from renting their property out, then that calls into question potentially their exempt status as a 501c3. So that would be difficult for this board to challenge or question. They're always allowed a little bit of that. Then the question is how much. I mean, I'm sure they've gone back and forth between exempt and non, right? Based on the administration, based on whose favor they can call, and
Nationally based on,
right,
that's not,
right.
it's not
That's
Maricopa.
nothing that Maricopa.
Right.
That's the IRS.
Yeah.
The U.S. Department of Treasury. So, that's a huge question, and I don't know that any of us have an idea. I mean, to me, GCU has always been a little bit mysterious because even though they are a nonprofit, a 501c3 entity, they still have a for-profit operating. So I'm not a tax lawyer. I don't know exactly how that works. So maybe a lot of that is attributed to the for-profit operating arm. I don't know. But what we do know with a fair amount of certainty is that that property will be exempt just by virtue of the fact of them owning it.
Which I think that's the more difficult concern that I hear what you're saying. It's so hard to accept just because it's so much bigger than us. But because I know even with the information we got from the county most recently, they gave an address of a home. When you look at the home, it has cars. It's someone's home, and so but it's a part of this parcel.
What we found when we looked at it was that Google's GPS marker is on the wrong side of the street. That the parcel that they're speaking to, when you look it up by the parcel number, the parcel is actually the piece that has the ball field.
So it's the reverse because it has it on the other side.
Yes, that's a Google error. When I looked it up by parcel, it is actually GTU. It's where the ball field is, where the parking garage is. There's a dorm.
So then
It's on
the
the other
other
side.
side gave us the wrong address.
No, the address is correct. It's Google that has the marker in the wrong place. Someone needs to tell Google to fix my little
Okay, so that address.
You're right. Yes, the address is correct. It's that Google has the marker in the wrong place. It's on the wrong side of the street. Yeah.
The house, yeah, really good.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
these houses.
Yeah, but the address and the parcel number both match, and in the county's website, when you go to that, where all the lines are, in the county's website, it is GCU, on the right side of the street, it's Google that's incorrect.
I have a question regarding the estimated $38 per household. Is there any insights you can share of how that formula is created or even just any reminders of that? That what we're going to be asking the taxpayers.
So that is my estimate. And how I came to that number. There's actually 5 different tax rates that had impact from this fiscal 25 year. One of them is the qualifying tax rate, which we've talked about is that statewide set rate. That is the first funding source for school district M&O across the state. What happens there when the property value is incorrect is that actually the state gives you not enough equalization assistance. So there's a mechanism for applying to the state to state this, that we didn't get enough equalization assistance, the property value was wrong, and the state should correct that. That's about $850,000. I'm going to jump down to the bottom of, if you're looking at the page, there is also the debt service piece. The debt service tax rate in fiscal 24-25 was set at 0.6447, approximately 64.5 cents. That's applied per $100 of assessed value. And because the tax rate was set a little bit too, the property value was too high when they were setting the tax rate was actually set too low and should have been a little bit higher. Interestingly, the process, this only applies with the debt service tax levy. That levy every single year looks at how much cash is in the account. And so it's self-corrected. It actually self-corrected in fiscal 26. Approximately $344,000 didn't come in because of this discrepancy as to what the rate was set at versus what it should have been set at. And so that self-corrected in 2026, offset between interest that was earned in that debt service fund or other taxpayer reconciliations from previous years. This moves all the time. But the process is how much cash you have, how much cash will they need to make the debt service payment next year, and we'll set the tax rate for fiscal 26 to accommodate that. So that one's self-correct. The other 3 that did not is the portion of the primary property tax that's not the qualifying tax rate, the M&O override, and the DAA override. So I summed up those 3 amounts based on the tax rates that were actually levied and the discrepancy in the property value, and that came to approximately $1.9 million. My math is then to determine, based on the property value of the district for fiscal 27, when the recoup levy would happen, what tax rate do I need to recoup $1.9 million? My math on that is approximately 45 cents. I then looked at the average home value in the district for tax purposes. That's approximately $83,000. The 45 cents against the $83,000 is what got me to $38. Let me talk for a minute, because this is my soapbox for the year, about value for tax purposes. That is not the Zillow value of a property. Okay, everybody's nodding, everybody's understood this, good. We happen to be in a quite unusual place in the real estate market where the market value of a house in almost the entire state is substantially higher than what the assessor values it at. The assessor is not being nice to you. The assessor has a constitutional restriction on how the value of a house that is unchanged can grow every year. And so that is 5%. Well, in a lot of the state, market value over the last really 10 years has exceeded that 5% level every year. And it accumulates. So there's now a pretty big gap between market value and the value for tax purposes. That will not always be the case. I would not have said that to you in 2014. For sure, they were on top of each other. And I'm sure they will be again. But right now, there is a very big discrepancy.
But to your point earlier, so the voters did pass the override.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, and so this is money that they've already approved and agreed to give to
Absolutely.
the school district. And we didn't collect what they had already agreed to give us.
Absolutely. The amount of revenue that was calculated that you should have collected that year, there's no issue with that. There is no discrepancy on that. The override is a formula. And that there's no question as to what that amount was. It was just the tax rate.
Just clarification on my question. About 38, that's per month per year. It's like,
It is for a single year. It is the full year. The property tax, most taxpayers, I think, well, if you have a mortgage, you are paying it through the mortgage company. If you're paying your taxes directly, I think most people pay twice a year, although there is an option to have the whole thing paid by December. But December.
Or just had asked questions specifically about ARS 15-907. If it was implicated or triggered by this levy adjustment process.
Is that the liabilities in itself?
get back to north.
You're looking at, I think there's,
So you get two, yeah, we have the 907 and the 905.
Yes, I was curious about his questions related to 907.
so Jim handily has it here. Excess and unexpected legal expenses. That is not this. Or for an emergency for which the school district did not receive funding pursuant to 41 yada yada, which is the school facilities board.
So
Because there were insufficient monies in the school facilities board emergency deficiencies fund. And then there is a process for that. You know, for what it's worth, any of these additional levies for school districts, there is always some sort of process required. You clearly understand when it's an override, you have to go to the voters. If it's some school districts have access to the desegregation levy, well, that is set in statute as to a certain date as to how much that was. The adjacent ways, you have to do the truth in taxation notice. You also have to submit paperwork through the school facilities oversight board. Nothing comes without some sort of peg attached to it. And even this, when we're talking about the school facilities board and the emergency deficiencies, you know, this one I've seen before, they're pretty specific. You need an actual vote from the school facilities board that says we don't have the money, and you now can attempt your process through liabilities and excess through 15907.
that doesn't apply to our situation. And I guess I'm just curious, you know, I think about the expertise that both of you have. And Jim, earlier you mentioned that you're not the expert in assessing property value, levy tax, all that type of stuff. And so the county is, so I think about a lot of the questions that you know, Mr. Conchas is asking and wanting to support and provide him or just respond to his request, like even just as a superintendent, as district leaders, who do we go to? Where do we get that kind of help to ask to get the information that he's requesting? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, there are experts, so like, lots of folks appeal their property taxes and are successful. So those folks, who are expert in our tax system and understand, you know, how it works to that level, could be in terms of investigating other parcels that could be subject to, transition from nonprofit, from for-profit to nonprofit. And just sort of the county process. I mean, I don't know who they are, but there are folks out there, I think, who deal with this stuff on a daily basis. We kind of deal with it at the macro level. You know, what's the value this year, and then how much can we issue in bonds? You know what I mean? We're not looking at parcel by parcel. That's what the county does. But the challenge, the county, in terms of what they've come up with, that would be someone else. But we can probably figure out who that would be. I mean, we just have worked in that area. I mean, it's
Yeah, well, and again, you know, I think about, you know, our mission as a school district and providing the best quality education for kids. And we talked about starting this meeting, you know, our priorities over here, trying to ensure that teachers understand how to teach. It's reading and those types of things. And so as I'm thinking about, you know, because, you know, if we're being asked to look at providing workshops and things like that, you know, where do we even begin with just even gaining a lot of this? I'm still taking notes myself, trying to understand a lot of this, so.
And I think at least one person at the county was pretty quickly responsive. And
it just took a while to get to that person. Is that part of it?
no, actually, the person in the county assessor's office, we never had an issue with responsiveness. That was the person that initially said, oh, wow, looks like this happened with GCU, that, you know, there were splits, there was consolidation, it's picked up differently between February and August. And look, the difference between the February roll and the August roll is almost exactly what that difference is in the GCU exemption. So no, those people have always been responsive. The back and forth was really with the county school superintendent's office. But I mean, I think that person, and there's a couple people at the assessor's office, would be happy to sit down with you, talk to you about the process, and give you ideas of who else might be experts for you.
Have you seen that happen? I'm not down there yet, but have you seen the county assessor be willing to meet with, you know, with subdivisions? I mean, I've never seen it happen because I've never seen it happen. I'm just thinking back to like Wassenaar, but then we were primarily dealing with county treasurer, and that was a different situation. Yeah. But this is something we're trying to avoid a train wreck going forward. And so how do we do that? But yeah, just reading the emails, I never had any interaction, but Steve Hammond seemed pretty helpful. So perhaps you would sit down with staff and then eventually maybe even with the board if you wanted to understand. He's the expert.
I guess this is what it is. We have to do this and this forward. That was my concern. It's not really the way to this out and get on the future. And we have, my neighborhood, you know, they together and submitted the protest over the tax valuations. And we're the one. That's different than the school district.
Right.
Has an effort been made, maybe this isn't appropriate for it, would be a popular question. Has an effort been made to work with GCU on any of this? I posed that to some of my partners in my office and they were like, well, it's likely that they could throw something at it other than cash. Programs, assistance in that way, resources, but not cash.
I think of the times when we've worked with them, the times and how they minimized the impact on the community members and shared other ways, like even when they were displacing the people in the trailer park, you know, they kept saying, you know, well, we have this warehouse where we can give them things, you know, that they don't need a blender, you know, they're not even going to have a home, you know, to plug the blender in, you know, and so you know, but it had a warehouse of just things that Costco had discontinued or it's right up. It's just not helpful, and that for them, that's what they kept. This is how we're helping.
So the answer is no.
My perspective.
But we have, I mean, again, we have one contact that we have tried to work with when we learned of apartment complex where people's leases were not being reviewed. And so we connected with someone who really wasn't as helpful, but we could keep trying to see how we can. It's not.
And that was the last year's, just like, situation, right? So I wonder if that apartment building is on track and being on that, you know, so this year, in August, or September, right, it's going to discover that, or likely to know that it happened this year, or.
Because that is on the other side of this address, so. This is where that
That's right.
apartment complex is, yeah, to see that if that's taken into, I don't know what parcel number that is. It's still considered nonprofit, but like I said, I'm just trying to figure out, you know, that these are the questions that are being asked of us. You know, just trying to figure out where do we go to get the information. So that we can better predict, because again, as you mentioned, I'm trying to think forward, you know, how we can.
And that I think, you know, you really hit it, right when the meeting started, the exposure issue, what is left out there that could still be transition to the nonprofit status, and how significant is that on our property tax base, and are you gonna capture it before the February roll so that we don't have the same problem with the tax rate setting?
Because we don't even know what we would actually oppose at this point in time. Outside of,
Right, what's obvious, what they have a sign on, yes.
there's rumors all over the neighborhood that they own this, they own that, they own.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is it's all public record. So it's a matter of someone going through on a parcel by parcel basis and reviewing to see where the ownership is. I mean, potentially they could be hiding it, if you will, in some LLC or some entity that doesn't have the name GCU on it, but that's hard to know. But something could be done to look at, you know, within a 1 mile by 1 mile area, you know, or whatever, however you might find the GCU campus. Again, on a parcel by parcel basis, to see, because obviously the risk is on the periphery of whatever that, because we already know the main campus is exempt. So I think that could be done, and a way to do that would, I think, to start the relationship with Steve. And then, you know, even monthly check-ins with him wouldn't be a bad idea, especially as we get closer to, you know, February, next February. Just to see what he knows, and then I just don't know who the person is who would be looking at each parcel. I mean, I can talk to my real estate partner to see who she would recommend doing that. I don't think you'd want to pay a real estate lawyer to do that, but I mean, it could just be even like a title company, maybe. They could be some ongoing relationship because they're expert in this. So yeah, just I'm just throwing that out. But I'll talk to my real estate partner and give you some ideas of what she said.
Because this is not even 20. So I have now my house. It's my evaluation for the 2027.
Yep.
How do I know? What is the district? No. Well, GCU is already. How do we know what happened? Was in February 2026 was accurate? We don't.
Yeah, I don't think any of us can say that we know that it is accurate.
Because the same thing could have happened between February 2026 and August. GCU could have bought something or decided to put something. That's my biggest fear. Is that it's ending. It's going to be continual process. We're going to be living here.
We do know that the numbers we got in February of 26 are very similar to what we saw in August of 25, which does not alleviate something new having been transitioned, but it also does not point to an error.
And again, the concern from us as board members is we are committed to providing solid education experience for our students, which includes taking care of our families' needs as well. And we are being would be, say restrict this can be right. But the miscalculations. Why? Or Spain tries to take, they try to hit us in every way they can. Now, this is just an additional, and on top of everything else that comes.
Well, and to your earlier comment about being frustrated with that February to August disconnect, I don't know how other states do it. I don't know if there's a better method necessary. I mean, we have 49 others to compare it against, but I just don't know. It seems, I mean, when I first started looking at school finance 25 years ago, I thought, well, it's really odd that we do it that way. And that it could potentially be a disconnect. And the only thing we know for sure is the February number is never going to be forward the August number. I mean, that's the certainty in the whole system, which just seems like a strange way to do it. There's got to be a better way, but obviously it has to run through the legislature. That's a tough road. They're never looking to, you'd have much better luck if you were trying to impose some bill that, or pass a bill to benefit charter schools. Obviously, it's Richmond. Or vouchers, right? I know you all know this. So I just don't know how that works. I'm not committed to that. Nor do I know even how we would rewrite the statute to make it work better for everyone, not just for this district. But there could be, I'm sure there's greater minds out there who would have a handle on that. I mean, what could be offered, but then it's, the minority party trying to carry a bill, at least the minority today, who knows?
Want to make it one of whatever, at least I'm able to, not that we have to end, but just like for awareness. I do have another question, just for all of us to hear is, it's not a legal requirement that we do this levy adjustment, correct? It's the district's ability to recoup funds that we're already should have been to us. Is that how?
Right. You don't have to do any of this. Just like the county doesn't have to advance it if you submit it. But the only way to be made whole, if you will, is by starting this process.
And so my follow-up question might just be, another one general, but what does it mean if we don't go whole? Just a reminder, what does it mean if we don't make ourselves whole? That's sort of what we're talking about, potentially not get it, or if that's not kind of the 800 that the state would like to give us, but like whatever that remainder is, that's what we would not be whole with. What does that mean for our initiatives from the district?
And so according to our letter, it's about $1.9 million. And yeah, I don't know how you feel that. Oh.
Motivates.
Your financial documents will show that you have a cash deficit. It will not be received favorably by rating agencies at the next time you're interested in issuing bonds. The Department of Education does do you remember what it's called? Some sort of assessment of districts, and they've got all kinds of categories that they sort of do an overall grade on. This is not going to reflect favorably for your financial grade.
In terms of districts at risk, is that kind of the way
Thank
they
you.
put it, at risk?
Thank you. Yes, they have an at-risk category. So this will not reflect favorably on that.
Sorry, if we were to do this, or not,
If you're to not do it, if you're to try and live with your $1.9 million goal. You also may at some point be in a position that you have to do some sort of financing because you're more likely to wind up with a cash flow problem. If this hole is not filled. It does not, I will tell you, it does not alter your budget capacity. You just don't have the funds to meet your budget authority. It doesn't change the calculation of what you are eligible to spend on, any of the various, components that incorporate school finance.
So there's no advantage to not doing it. We obviously have a good name, it's not going to sign this. Is that going to? Is that the plus moving forward?
I don't see that. I mean, they're looking for, I know there was language in the emails about being signed by the entire board. My way of thinking, board action is a majority of the board. I mean, we just called the other day a nearly $500 million bond election with a 3-2 board vote. So you wonder, well, how does that can look in the community if 2 board members are close to it? Well, maybe that it'll cause the bond election to fail, but it's still a valid bond election with no question about the legality of it. And if the voters support it, then we'll issue bonds. But it's always nice to have a unanimous board look better, but it doesn't affect the legality. And I don't think the county school super is gonna take it any differently if we don't have unanimity from the board. I think it's still an action of the board. I think she'll treat it that way.
So explaining process to me again, because I'm just going on. We submit this to the study bonds. You know, she said to
The board of supervisors, and I guess they preliminarily look at it in June. I forget the date, I'm sorry.
June 24th.
And then by the 3rd Monday in August, they have to certify a tax rate that hopefully includes this. So that's, again, this, none of this will be on autopilot. It'll be discussions. And that's why and feel free if you have edits, but we had recommended that we include, Supervisor Gallardo's, chiefs of staff, on there, just so the more attention to this, the better, by our way of thinking, because it is somewhat a political process. So that's why we recommend that they be brought in, early with this. And then discussions, perhaps discussions are had with them so that they understand how important this is. I mean, the dollar speaks for itself, but we all want to be on the same page.
This does not happen every year by any stretch. I'm not sure I know of one that's happened in the last 5 or 7 years.
The request for this.
Yes.
oh no. In my mind,
I think there's a decent amount of discretion built into the statute, and even if your board decides to move forward, it does require a recommendation from the county school superintendent. That implies discretion to them. I think the validation component of it is a lot more objective, but there's a recommendation.
Regarding what approach or strategy or something that we mindful of as we move forward with the DEA. Now, it's a little bit separate, but we are going into that. We're going to be asking voters for this again. Do we want to communicate? How much do we want to communicate some of this slurry at all? Or what ways do you think it would be?
Well, so you're allowed, the district is allowed to communicate factual and neutral information. So this would all qualify. I mean, assuming that it was presented as such. I mean, here's the reality. We had an under levy, and here's what we're doing as your stewards, moving this forward and to the county to let it work through the county's process. And that's what we can do under the statute. So you're doing what you can do. So just like when schools sell land, I think we sold land in the past, and we're trying to show that you're good stewards of the school district resources. Here, I understand the negative in the community that, hey, I was dismissed, and I think it's a complicated issue, you can tell. So, and it's nothing this board did or anyone at the district did. You inherited this problem from the county. So I don't think we're necessarily trying to explain every step in the process to the community, just that here's the problem and here's how we'll resolve it under the statute. So I wouldn't leave with that. Obviously it's in this, I'm going to say necessity, but we like to avoid when we describe the DAA, the override, we don't say here's why it's needed. It's here's why the board chose to ask the voters to consider it in November. But it's not you have to do this. It's here's what it would fund, here are the programs, you the voter make the decision on whether you want to fund these programs or not. If you don't fund the DAA, if you don't approve it, here's what's not going to happen. That's all fair. So that's the big story, I think. This is in the background, I think. I wouldn't leave with it because it's hard for folks to understand. But when and if it comes up, then a simple explanation is better. And then we'll know more, in the next month or so, how much support we're getting. And then maybe, well, before the election, August is well before the election. So hopefully we'll have a fix before we're even asking the voters to vote on this. And in my experience, most voters don't get real interested in your election until they get the voter information pamphlet, 35 days before the election. A lot of folks don't even know an election is happening. So by then, it should be fully resolved one way or the other.
Should we be lobbying?
Yeah.
Showing logs or going to the, or the supervisor, any of them.
Well, a coordinated effort would be best. To decide how you want to approach them. But yeah, to the extent you have contacts, I've offered up that my office has contacts with the county school super. I'm sure you do as well. So there could be a coordinated approach to that for sure. But I think, yeah, this doesn't just get submitted and then we just trust the process. We can't.
How can we trust the process?
Right.
We got the process.
Right, we can't, right, exactly. So we submit it and then we have discussions, sidebars, offline discussions, whatever. And then even showing up to the meeting, I think makes sense. For the supervisors.
It's appropriate time to then, any last party thoughts or things for us to consider? Right, then with that, we'll go to C, for meeting closing. C1 adjournment, do I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Flora, do I have a second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned.